Hello, this is Dr. Cisse covering anatomy and physiology. Today we'll talk about tissues. First, let's talk about our lecture slides. We're going to have about 131 slides. You're going to be like, ooh, what? Don't panic. Honestly, many of them are just pictures of things that you have to look over under many different angles to be able to understand. In this video, I'll talk about 4 types of tissues: epithelial tissues, connective tissues, nervous tissues, and muscular tissues or muscle tissues. Now, for the epithelial tissues, we'll talk about 8 types. Connective, 10 types. Then we'll talk about nervous tissue and muscular tissues. So if you think about it, the 8 types plus 10 is 18, plus nervous and muscular is 20. So we're learning 20 types of tissues and how do we form them. Let's talk about epithelial tissues first. What is the tissue? If you understand what is a cell, which is the basic unit of life, when you put a lot of cells together, they will perform a specific function. A group of 2 or more types of cell represent a tissue. Now, how do we define them? We define them based on the shape of the cells, how the cells come together, how many layers. All that will determine how we define a tissue, how we specify, we characterize a tissue. The first type of tissue we'll talk about here is epithelial. What is epithelial? Epi means top, thelial means layer. It's always on the top layer. If you can touch part of your body, it will be epithelial. That means it's exposed outside, or something can go through it, like your nose, your mouth, your ear. Anything that can have something going through will be epithelial. How do we define epithelial? Now, if you want to think about it like you're playing with a Lego, different kind of blocks, and pretend we got 3 shapes in those blocks. One are very flat, looking like quarters, like coins. The second looks like cubes, and the third one looks like a long one, like a column. The one that looks like it's flat is called squamous. You see that squamous. The one that looks like it's a cube is called cuboidal. The long one is called columnar. Now, we define also epithelial based on the numbers of layers. If the tissue, the epithelial has 1 layer, we call it that simple. If it has more than 2 layers, 2 or more layers, we call that stratified. So we got simple and stratified. Now, if you look at the shape of the cell, if it's a simple and it's squamous, which means flat, is called simple squamous. If it's simple, but the shape is cuboidal, we call that simple cuboidal. If the shape is columnar, long, and 1 layer, we call that simple columnar. At the same time, if the number of layers is more than 2 or 3, right, 2 or more, then we call that stratified. So we can have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, then stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar. And there are a couple of them that are not regular. They don't look like none of these. They're like between them. One looks like it's stratified, but it's actually simple. We call that pseudo, which means fake, stratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. We can call it pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium, but usually because it has cilia, we add the word ciliated. Then we have one that looks like squamous, it looks like cuboidal. We call that transitional. It's transit between simples and stratified and cuboidal. So we call that transitional epithelium. Then let's move to connective tissue. I'm not going to go into detail. I'll just tell you what connective tissue look like. If epithelial tissues look like cells next to each other with a shape and layer, connective tissue looks like a mix of cells with some kind of ground substance, some kind of dough. Think about it like you're making pizza, right? Pizza. If you're making pizza and you're making a lot of toppings into it, and let's pretend you're adding spaghetti, vermicelli, macaroni, you're actually creating connective tissue. So you don't have cells next to each other, but you have a mixture of things, right? So in those connective tissue, you're gonna have different type of cells. We call them tappings, right? The cell could be the neutrophil, the monocyte, the eosinophil, the basophil, the lymphocyte. Those are white blood cells. Then you can have the mast cell, the adipocyte, fat cell, chondrocyte, the cell for your cartilage, osteocyte, the bone cell, osteoblast, osteoprogenitor cell. So all the cells look like the topping of our pizza, basically. Then you have fibers. The fiber will be like the spaghetti, the angel's hair, and the macaroni. It's gonna be something you mix with the ground substance to make it more consistent, to give it more shape to it. Then the liquid part of it, the gel, the matrix part of it, which will be either liquid or gel or solid. Then the rest of the tissue will be either the muscle tissue or the nervous tissue. Now, the muscle, we have three types of muscle: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. The skeletal muscles are the muscles that are attached to bone. That's why we call them skeletal. The cardiac are your heart muscle, and the smooth muscle are the muscles in hollow organ, like your stomach, your esophagus, things that have things inside that can be moved, or your blood vessels. Then the nervous tissue, we got the neuron, which is the basic cell, and the glial cell, or the neuroglial cell, which will be the cell that surround the neuron so it can do its job. Then at the bottom, you see that I talk about cell junction. If you take the epithelial, where the cells are next to each other, we'll talk about how they're attached to each other, cell junction, or they're attached to the basement, desmosome, or they have touched to each other with space, like a kind of door and window between the two cells, gap junction. Then if you take the epithelial also, some of the cell will be so much specialized, they become glands. So these glands will secrete some kind of thing. They will secrete either hormones, they can secrete some kind of secretion, like saliva or sweat. So those glands, like sweat gland, salivatory gland, will secrete some gland. They're just specialized type of epithelial tissue. Now let's introduce the whole lecture now. There are four types of tissue. Now let's define histology, the study of tissues. There are 53 trillion cells of 200 different types of cell. We talk about the four types of tissues already. Epithelial, top layers; connective, connecting them; nervous, with a nerve; and muscular, with a muscle tissue. So what is the tissue? A group of similar cells and cell product working together to perform a specific role in an organ. We talked about this already. Now, where do they come from? There are three types of germ layer. Like during cell development, like during embryology, you will see that the outer layer, the ectoderm, will be the next epidermis and the nervous system. So the top layer will be the epidermis nervous system. The inner layer, the inside, will give the lining of the digestive system or the respiratory tract, the digestive gland, and among others, and all the internal inside organs. And then the mesoderm, like the middle, will be between them, which will be coming from the cell, the tissue called the mesenchyme. So it has also collagen fiber and fibroblast in gel matrix. So that's the mesoderm is the one that will become bone, blood, and cartilages. So this is just to show you how we slice tissues to look. So depending how you slice it, you can look at different view. So of course we have to understand how to look at the tissue and understand. So let's talk about epithelial tissue, because this video, I did it for epithelial, but I just want to brush on connective and stuff so you can have an idea. So we know epithelial will be what? Body surfaces and body cavity. It means that you can touch it or something can touch it. If you swallow something or something like that. And it's usually exposed to the environment or internal space. And we talk about here is avascular. It does not have blood vessel. Your skin does not have, but that's why when you scratch yourself, you don't feel it. So I'm going to go to the epithelial tissues picture so we can look at them and see. So we talk about how epithelial are divided into the shape of the cell and the number of layers. You see on the top here, the simple epithelial here, right? So you can see simple, pseudostratified, and stratified. Why? Because stratified will have a lot of layers. And then the squamous you can see is flat. The cuboidal you can see looks like a cube, and columnar. So let's talk about simple squamous is a thin scale layer. Simple cuboidal, square or round cell. Simple columnar, tall and narrow. And then we'll talk about goblet cells, wine glass-shaped mucus-secreting cells in simple columnar and pseudostratified epithelial. It's just a type of cell that will secrete some product that can perform specific function. Now let's look at the picture here. You see the simple squamous? You see it's just the basement membrane here and one layer of cell. For example, that's the lining of alveoli, glomeruli, endothelium, and serosa. Simple squamous. You can see it here too, just a one layer, depending on the slice, see just a one layer of cell. And then simple cuboidal, you can see the cube shape, right? And then you can see it's just a one layer. On the left, you can see that's a section is kind of transverse, and here is kind of longitudinal, like sagittal type of cut. You can see one circle here, one lining. So simple cuboidal. You can find it in the liver, the mammary salivary gland, the bronchiole, and the kidney tubule. Simple cuboidal. Then you see the simple columnar. You find it in the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, the uterus, the kidney, and the urinary tubes. You can see that here. Simple columnar. Simple columnar. You can see it. It's just a long. And the pseudostratified, you can see that the cell is kind of squeezed between them. They look like many layers, but they are not. Some of them just lost their top or their bottom. That's why you see the nuclei scattered top and bottom. And here you can see also some cilia. That's why we call it pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Then stratified epithelium, you can see stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar. Let's talk about each one specifically. The stratified epithelial, two kinds. One is keratinized, the other one is non-keratinized. It doesn't have keratin. What is keratin? It is the waterproof substance on our skin. So the keratinized is going to be what? On the epidermis, the top of the skin, the palm of the hand, and the sole of the feet. That's going to be keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. You can see here it's kind of very thick. And non-keratinized will be internal part of the body. For example, inside the vagina or the mouth, inside the mouth, or the esophagus or the tongue. Things that can have something in them that can rub them all the time, so they lose the skin, but they're not exposed outside. Let's talk about this one. The stratified cuboidal, we can find them in sweat gland, right? Sweat gland, that's one the main thing I want you to remember. Stratified cuboidal, stratified cuboidal. And then the stratified columnar, you can see we don't have them a lot, but you can also find them in digestive tract. Then transitional, we find it in the bladder. It looks thin on one side and thick on the other side. Transitional epithelium. Now here, to conclude, simple and stratified. Simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and pseudostratified. And the stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, stratified columnar, and stratified transitional, right? So now let's stop here. We're not going to cover connective. We'll cover connective in a different video. All right, thank you very much. I'll see you in class.